Welcome to Healthy Chats. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Kaitlin Harkess. Dr. Kaitlin is a clinical psychologist. She's also a meditation and yoga teacher. So Kaitlin, thank you for speaking with me today. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, William. It's nice to get the opportunity to connect.
I want to start by asking you has being a psychologist made you a better yoga teacher?
I think so. I think everything is so interrelated, isn't it? And probably anything we do in one domain in our life, influences the other domains. They're not entirely separate entities. So for sure, I think any sort of personal development or learning that I undertake in one domain necessarily translates across to the other.
With health aid, we talk a lot about exercising and creating healthy behaviors. Ultimately, that's what getting healthy is really about. It's a level of habit change. If we talk about physical activity, how is physical activity? How we know that physical activity is scientifically proven to improve your mood. From your research and clinical experience, can you elaborate a little bit on that and how are they interconnected?
Yeah, so physical activity definitely improves your mood. It is the most effective anxiolytic. So it helps decrease anxiety and antidepressant on the market, essentially. And it's free with very, I guess no side effects if you're doing a physical activity that is recommended and safe for your body in its current state. So we know that when we're moving our bodies, we're essentially getting this neurochemical concoction that is going to help us feel really good. And as I said, decrease the level of anxiety or overwhelm that we're experiencing. So that's the neurochemical effect, but it also changes what's happening in our bodies, right? Like we can build up body armor through our days. And this might mean like the tight shoulders, the clenched jaws, depending on what the context is. And when we're moving our bodies, we start to release some of that tension, some of that physical manifestation of stress. So as our body posturing changes, that's going to change how we're relating and engaging with the world as well. We start to develop more body awareness, which can also be incredibly helpful and beneficial. Because if we can start to notice earlier on, oh, wow, like I'm getting that knotting in my stomach, or I'm getting those fist clenching, teeth clenching, shoulder clenching sensations, maybe this means I need to slow down. Maybe this means that instead of having my lunch hurriedly at my desk while I try and get another project out the door, maybe if I go for a walk, a break, I'm going to feel better in my body. I'm going to be able to focus better this afternoon or whatever the context may be. So we're cultivating that body awareness alongside the physical transformation, the neurochemical transformation that is happening.
Yeah, you talk about body awareness. Can you tell for people who don't know what is body awareness and how do you practice that?
Yeah, it's kind of like being able to map your body, at different times in our lives, and different people who've had different journeys to this point in time, might be really disconnected from their body. And that can be something that develops as a safety mechanism, right? There might be situations that have unfolded in our life where feeling what's going on in our body or feeling our body is actually really quite dangerous or overwhelming. However, if we are at this point in time in a safe, secure place in our lives, and that mechanism, that safety behavior of body disconnect doesn't make sense and isn't serving us, learning to map our bodies internally, like learning to be able to feel where our body is in space and connect in, attune to our body, is often really helpful in terms of recognizing our emotional state, recognizing when we're struggling, when we're feeling overwhelmed, because if we can recognize what's going on for us, we can choose behaviors that are going to serve us, that are going to take us in the direction we want to go in our lives.
Okay, so it's really about recognizing how you're feeling, why you're feeling what you're feeling, and then having that level of awareness, understanding allows you to then act according to that, rather than just acting on your emotions. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah. I like, you could say very simply, notice, name, and tame. We have to notice what's going on in our body, the emotional state, which is generally something we pick up on because of sensation that's happening. So that's the noticing. And then we can name it, we can label it. Oh, this is anxiety, this is overwhelm, this is jealousy, this is frustration, this is grief. If we can name it, in naming it, we kind of get what's going on for us and we can choose action. We don't need to repress big emotions, uncomfortable emotions to engage in effective behaviors, to engage in health behaviors. We can bring our anxiety, our grief, our depression, our overwhelm into physical activity with us. But often when we acknowledge it's there, we're able to be more compassionate to how we show up to the activity, make space for it, and still honor essentially where we're at.
Yeah. And how much of that is a part of your yoga practice?
Yeah, 100%. Because, I shouldn't say that broadly across the board. I hope it becomes 100%. At current, there can be this sense of toxic positivity that might exist in certain yoga arenas or in wellness generally, this idea that we need to feel good all the time, which isn't the case as human beings. We have all the range of emotions. We all feel, sadness, grief, stress. Like those are things that are familiar to us. We can label them. We can talk about them because we all feel them. So this idea that if we did enough yoga or enough meditation that we'd feel good all the time is really unhelpful. Where I think a helpful and healthful yoga practice exists is where we can use our yoga practice to start to notice and make space for what's going on for us. The joyful, the comfortable emotions, as well as the uncomfortable ones. And when we get more familiar on our mat with sensation and how we might lean into sensation, cultivate strength, openness, I think it again helps that body awareness and helps us develop emotional awareness, because emotions, we could say energy in motion. Emotion is energy in motion. It's something that's happening in our body physiologically. Emotion is not just in our mind. So I think yoga helps us in that process too.
Yeah. And would you say that happens across any form of exercise where you can bring more awareness into your body here?
Yeah, I don't think it needs to necessarily just be yoga, that there are many ways of engaging in physical activity. From where I sit, I think it's really useful to engage in physical activity in a mindful way. I'm all for physical activity generally, and ideally bringing some mindful awareness and intentionality to that physical activity. So intention is what we choose to focus on and our why for doing physical activity. I could go for a walk just because I lost my keys maybe, and I'm looking for my keys, or I could go for a walk because I want to listen to the birds and get fresh air, and I want to feel my feet on the pavement and cultivate health in my body, enjoy nature. It's the same walk, but you can see that the intentionality, the function is very different. Every time we do an activity, we get to choose what our intention is. So if you're engaging in any physical activity, if you're choosing to engage in that activity because of your health, your well-being, because it's going to cultivate and enhance your performance in other domains, it's going to allow you to show up more effectively in your workplace, in your home life, you bring that intention to your activity. And I think in a way, that's really a yoga practice in perhaps a different format. I'm not necessarily a proponent of no pain, no gain. I think being able to lean into sensation and perhaps uncomfortable sensation is helpful, but I'm not someone who's going to say, oh, go for the ripping, tearing, that unhelpful kind of pushing beyond limits. But I think if we can be with strong sensation in our yoga practice, in our running, in our climbing, in any sort of movement we're doing, that's really helpful.
So do you think with a lot of people, from my personal experience, I speak with who I guess were struggling to adopt healthy behaviors, whether that's undertaking exercise a little bit more, do you think it's helpful for them to understand why they're doing what they're doing? Because often they find exercise to be uncomfortable, and the reason they're not able to commit to an exercise or do a bit more of it because it just feels bad for them, and they can't see any other reason or any intention for why they would do an exercise or how that would translate to help them in their other goals or things they want to do in life. How much of that is true, you think?
Oh, William, that's such a good point. That's really an excellent point, that exercise is challenging to do. And like from an evolutionary perspective, right? We're not wired to want to exercise. It's a learned behavior. So we are essentially wired to survive. And survival historically meant that we wanted to eat as much like carb heavy, calorie heavy food and be as slow and as sloth-like as possible so that when that tiger came for us, we at that moment had the energy to get up and run. It made no evolutionary sense to go up a hill when you could go around it and it was easier. You wanted to save that energy for situations when your life was at stake. So we are not wired to want to get off the couch. We're not wired to want to put ourselves into uncomfortable situations. And often when they actually study when our body fully fatigues, it's different from when we feel fatigued. Our muscles could go indefinitely, but it's actually a safety behavior that our mind says, too much, enough, stop now, because then we're less likely to actually injure ourselves. So we have these sort of layers of protection. So for sure, exercise is going to be uncomfortable, and we have to know our why when we started. You will, if you're on this journey to exercise, get to a point, for most of us, where we love it because you get that neurochemical kick that's going to keep you going. And it starts to become part of your identity, your sense of self, your sense of self-efficacy, which is incredibly empowering. However, early on that journey, it might not feel comfortable and it might not feel fun and it might not feel like who you are. So I think we need to be really mindful that when we're at that place in our journey, we're not setting our goal as doing a marathon by next week. We want to start small, doing slow increments of activity and understanding again that intention. You know, your physical activity when you're starting your journey might be to get your runners on each morning. And maybe after a couple of weeks, you take those runners out the door. And maybe after a few more weeks, you're going around the block, like you're building up to create these habits. We don't want to go boom to bust. Essentially, we don't want to go in hard, fail or struggle and then lose our motivation. We want to start small enough that we can build wins, that we can build that sense of motivation that tends to come with success and that self-efficacy.
Yeah. So for someone starting an exercise program, for example, or someone who is wanting to do a bit more exercise, they need to find out, from what I'm understanding, they need to find out why they're doing it, whether that's, helping them feel a bit better when they're playing with their kids, or feeling a little bit better when they're helping the friend move some furniture, for example. And then having that in the forefront can allow them to persist through that bit of discomfort. Is that something?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. We might not exercise because we've been told by a health practitioner that that's good for us, that that's going to help us live longer. Like that's not something that's so palatable. But if you're told, wow, you're less likely to scream at your kids or your partner, or you're more likely to be able to focus and finish that project that's been hanging over your head, or it's going to help you improve your mood so you can actually get out of bed in the morning and go have a shower or call your grandmother. Like, if we have really tangible reasons to practice and reasons that matter to us, because what matters to each of us is going to be different, that's going to help us on the journey. Like, that intentionality is going to support motivation in a different way than someone saying, oh, you really should do this.
Yeah. And can I ask a bit from your experiences? Nearly everyone know that, exercise or just the healthy things that they do are good for them. Mm-hmm. And they know what needs to be done. For example, they know what's good for them, but they just struggle to translate into action. Yeah. And can you shed a bit of insight into why that happened? I'll give you an example. For example, I think the hardest group that I've come across from conversation in terms of creating healthy behavior change are, let's say, new parents with young kids. I think for them, when they become new parents, they adopt this level of selflessness where the kids come before them in everything. And especially if they're working full time, for example, they really struggle to put in the time, to make the time to, for example, do some exercise, right? So can from your experience, how can they change that a little bit? Because they know what's good for them. Yeah.
Firstly, like, complete empathy. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. So new parents, I feel you. I understand. It is really challenging. Like, your life changes. So all of those patterns and rhythms that you had before are essentially wiped out the window. So it's not just kind of navigating the selflessness and the self-sacrifice that we might go into as new parents. It's that we actually have never been in this territory before. So it's not like we can think, oh, when I was exercising regularly, what was I doing then? Because the lay of the land's completely different. So I think it's a matter of figuring out, again, your why, because I know I head out to a yoga class often in the evenings. when everyone's doing dinner, which doesn't feel amazing because I do value dinner and that family time and having that time sitting down together. However, I know I'm going to snap or lose my patience or like zone out or disconnect from my kids if I don't get in regular physical activity. I know that for me, that is not just for the health of my body, like that is a mental health behavior. That is a parenting behavior. It is so important for me to move my body. And where getting to a yoga class might not be practical, for instance, getting out of the house, doing something in the house is sometimes an option. In honesty, again, for some parents, they might have like a little coveted space where they could go and do an exercise class online or move their bodies. That doesn't exist necessarily in my house because the kids open doors. So for me, actually putting the kids in a pram and doing like a long walk is an alternative. And I make sure that I do that every day. For my partner, he's super happy to go to the park and do runarounds and throw some push-ups in while the kids are doing runarounds too. So it's about getting creative about how we might bring our physical activity into our daily lives. And it's not for us, like it is, but in a lot of ways, if you're doing that activity for your kids, I think it changes the lens because you're right. We do feel like we have to sacrifice everything for our kids. The unfortunate thing is when we lose our health of mind and body, we can't be there for our kids. So if you let your health slide, if you stop moving your body, using your body, what's that going to mean for your kids in time? And what modeling is it going to give for your kids? Because no doubt you want your kids to be healthy. And we know that moving our bodies is related to longevity, mental health, physical health. If you want that health for your kids, we've got to model it.
Yeah. So I think from what I'm hearing is you to begin with, you need a level of understanding, awareness, and mindfulness that if I don't exercise, for example, I'm going to not be present. I can't be present. I can't be my fullest for my kids. If I value patience, for example, if I'm not exercising, then I can't be patient for my kids nowadays. So I think you need to be able to understand that in order for you to take action.
For sure. Yeah. So I think it's getting clear on your values. Like, what sort of a parent do you want to be? And in order to be that parent, what do you need to do? And if we take it beyond parenting, because there's lots of people who do struggle to move their bodies, it's like, what sort of a person do you want to be? And does physical activity, does body movement support you in that journey? And if you can get clear on what matters to you and the person you want to show up as, then you can figure out all the things that will support you to be that person. Because you're totally right, William. Like, we all know what we need to do health-wise, but we need to have a reason why, because it's not intuitive. We're not wired that way.
Yeah. If we talk a bit about, coming back to mindfulness again, how I think a lot of people kind of know what it is, but they don't really know how to get started. For example, how should people get started? Or if you have any tips on what that is? Yeah.
So essentially what we're working to cultivate is this ability to be present. When we are thinking about the past or the future, we tend to rate our mood lower. So this is like a really famous Harvard study looked at what individuals were doing at different points in time and where they rated their mood, like whether they were feeling good or whether they maybe weren't feeling as good. When people are connected to the present moment, they rate their mood higher, regardless of the activity. So you could be taking the trash out. And if you are presently focused on taking the trash out, listening to the birds, the weight of the trash bag in your hands, your mood is going to be rated higher. You're going to be having a better experience than being in a bubble bath, candle burning, and thinking over that email you need to send for work, or ruminating about how your boss spoke to you earlier in the day. When we are somewhere other than here, we are not going to rate our mood highly. So being able to be here is going to support our mood, our well-being. So we want to cultivate the ability to be present with this moment. Mindfulness is like a training tool to be able to be more present. So mindfulness essentially means paying attention, I would argue with compassion, to this present moment. And that means that you notice when your mind wanders off, and then you practice coming back again and again, because your mind will wander off. It's like a monkey. It runs around left, right, and center. That's what minds do. And we can be compassionate and understanding. There's nothing wrong with us if our mind is wandering off. Totally normal. Congratulate yourself when you notice and come back to the present moment. So it might be that you have a cup of coffee or tea and you notice the sensation of the warmth of the cup, the smell. You might notice that sensation as you take a sip and that urge to swallow. Just really paying attention to little moments in the day can be a useful way to start a mindfulness practice. You don't need to sit down on a cushion for 30 minutes, an hour. I get that people don't have time. And certainly in the beginning, we want to establish a small habit first. So maybe it is choosing to be mindful when you shower, or choosing to be mindful when you wash the dishes, or when you have that cup of coffee in the morning. Start there and see how that mindfulness muscle grows, how that intentionality to be present is cultivated.
Okay. What does it mean to be present? I think you said about being paying attention to what you're thinking and what you're feeling around you. Is there any more to it?
It's basically that, like noticing what's happening now. So not being present is when you're caught in your brain, like in thoughts about the future or the past. Being present is like noticing what's happening around you and within you in this moment. So you can use your senses really easily to do that. What do you see? What do you hear? What can you feel? What do you smell? What are you tasting? These are ways to kind of check in with what's here now. And you can even notice your thoughts. So we might call this meta awareness. Like, oh, I notice I'm having the thought of what will I have for lunch? All right, mind, come back. What do you see right now? Oh, I notice that I'm feeling irritable, or that I'm feeling jealous, or that I'm feeling joyful. Okay, thanks, mind. What do I see right now? What does my breath feel like right now? Am I on an inhale? Am I on an exhale? So it's kind of this journey, again, of that noticing, naming, and taming, really.
Do you find that people who are more mindful and more present and they have the habit, are they healthy in the long run? And why is that?
The research would suggest they are. So the research would suggest that people who have a mindfulness practice, who engage in mindfulness regularly, are healthier in mind and body. So I mean mental health and physical health. And there's lots of proposed mechanisms around this. As we're able to attune to the present, as we're able to cultivate this present moment awareness, this mindful attention, it allows us to step back or unhook from unhelpful thoughts and feelings that can lead us down the path of anxiety, depression, mental health struggles. There's also suggested mechanisms around the fact that we're essentially changing our neurochemical makeup, which is going to change like how our heart is even beating, moving. So like our heart health can be affected, our cardiovascular health, perhaps because we lower our overarching stress levels, or our appraisal of stress, our negative connection that happens. We cultivate health or practice in one domain. How curious that both exercise and, in some cases, meditation, stillness, that they both support our physical health. So what a lovely opportunity to perhaps bridge them. If you're going to be doing some physical activity, maybe on either end, you could tack a mindfulness practice. It could be moving mindfulness in the form of walking or yoga, or seated if that feels more familiar or more accessible.
Great, Kaitlin. Can we just have a closing thought on, if someone's listening to this, what is kind of one tip you want to give them in terms of adopting a little bit more mindfulness and awareness in their life? Where should they start?
Yeah, start small, please, because we don't need to be Buddhas in the sense that we're spending hours each day on our cushion or in a yoga studio to show up effectively in our lives. Figure out what matters to you, and then figure out what's one little change that you can make to get there. A small change, a small habit, what we might call a tiny habit. So if for you, what matters is your relationships with your family, or the work that you're doing, the environment, figure out what you value, and then figure out a small change that will bring you more into alignment with the person you want to be, someone who is showing up in alignment, demonstrating those things that you value. So please start very, very small, very, very tiny. If it means putting your sneakers on in the morning, if it means taking 3 mindful breaths before you get out of bed, brilliant. Please be kind with yourself. Don't go in hard and heavy-handed. Start tiny.
Awesome. Thank you. So it's really about understanding what you value and then choosing your actions based on what you value rather than your emotions. So Kaitlin, thank you so much for your time. I just want to thought, where can our audience find you and your podcast and your services?
Yeah. So I host the Wisdom for Wellbeing podcast. That's on Apple, it's on Spotify. So if you just search Wisdom for Wellbeing, my therapy practice is based in Adelaide. And if you go to wisdomforwellbeing.com.au or .au, that will link through to it. I also have a website, drkaitlin.com, where I post a number of free resources for individuals who are looking at cultivating mental health and essentially utilizing mindfulness and modern psychological skills to do so. I'm at Dr. Kaitlin on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. People will be able to find me there. So please feel free to reach out.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Kaitlin. Thank you for your time. Have a good one.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you, William.